Have you ever wondered why a man can share your bed, but still feel like a stranger? Why his hands can trace your skin, yet never seem to touch your soul? Some women confuse lust for love because they've never witnessed what love actually looks like in a man's unconscious behavior. But love, true, soul-bound, psychologically naked love, doesn't scream. It reveals itself in eerie subtleties, in the way his body hesitates, in the way his gaze lingers, even when you're not looking. Most women are waiting for a man to confess, but the deeper truth? A man's deepest confession is never spoken. It's shown in what he does in bed when he no longer feels the need to hide his soul. And if you don't know how to read it, you'll miss the moment he gave you everything. So what happens when his logic shuts down and his shadow lets you in? Let's begin. 1. The stillness between his touches. Why does a man freeze, not in fear, but in quiet, when he's most emotionally exposed? Many women expect love to look like action, passion, movement, intensity. But sometimes the deepest emotion emerges in the exact opposite, in stillness. In bed, most men are performative. They chase performance, validation, dominance. But when a man is in love, something shifts beneath his skin. He begins to pause, not because he's unsure, but because he's overwhelmed. Stillness becomes sacred, because in that moment, it's not about taking, it's about feeling. He touches you less like an object and more like a mystery. His pauses are not empty. They are full of reverence. This is where many women misunderstand the silence. They interpret it as a lack of interest or a sign he's disconnected. But love makes a man slow down. It disrupts his rhythm. It removes the script. In the stillness, he stops performing and starts being. And when you don't recognize that moment, you miss the portal. You miss the mirror of his soul, whispering, "I'm not here for conquest. I'm here to be changed by you." This behavioral shift often arises after a woman has unknowingly pierced his defenses, not with seduction, but with presence. When she holds her own emotional depth without flinching, his nervous system relaxes. And in that moment, his touch becomes less about reaction and more about reverence. The masculine stops chasing sensation and begins to feel meaning. Most men don't even realize they're doing it. But if you pay attention, the stillness between his touches becomes louder than words. Imagine the ocean after a storm, not chaotic, not loud, just quiet. And in that quiet, a different kind of intimacy blooms. That's what it feels like when a man's love finally outpaces his ego. Picture yourself lying beneath moonlight, not moving, not needing to speak, just feeling everything. That's when love whispers. You are most loved in the pauses you do not understand. But beyond this stillness, there's another sign, one darker, more haunting, more revealing. And that's where we go next. The sudden emotional disorientation. Why does a man suddenly become awkward, avoidant, or strangely sensitive after deep physical connection? Because love doesn't just soften a man, it destabilizes him. When a man is only attracted to you physically, he remains in control. But when he feels something, his ego shatters. The woman who stirs his soul doesn't just arouse him, she exposes him, and his reaction, clumsy, nervous, emotionally disoriented, is not a red flag. It's a sacred tremor, a sign that you've entered the part of him he doesn't know how to protect. Many women mistake this moment for emotional immaturity. But what they're witnessing is the raw vulnerability of the masculine when his emotional armor starts to crack. His body may have been prepared, his heart was not. And this is where the modern woman often self-sabotages. She misreads his silence, his sudden withdrawal, his weird vulnerability, as a loss of interest. When in truth, It's the opposite. His shadow is surfacing, and he doesn't yet know how to hold it in front of you. Men don't just fear rejection, they fear being seen in their tenderness, in their unguarded desire to be held without having to perform. When a man is in love, he doesn't always get louder. He becomes confused. The same man who once dominated every interaction suddenly stumbles over his words, avoids eye contact, or breathes more shallowly around you. That's not weakness. That's transformation. That's the boy dying, and the man being born. The empowered woman recognizes this moment. She doesn't panic. She doesn't chase. She doesn't pull away to protect herself from his confusion. She becomes the calm in his chaos, the mirror that doesn't flinch when he's unsure of his reflection. In doing so, she teaches him how to stay when it's uncomfortable, and how to love without needing to escape the gravity of it. Think of it like this. A falcon, once wild, perched quietly at your window, trembling, not because it's afraid of you, but because it no longer knows how to fly without longing for your hands. Picture this. He looks at you after, confused, shaken, searching, and instead of shrinking, you hold his gaze with quiet knowing. That's when you become unforgettable. He'll only get lost in you when he no longer knows how to find himself. But emotional disorientation is just the beginning. The next sign? It reveals something even more intimate, a man's hidden hunger to protect what he's afraid to lose. And that's where we go next. The subconscious guarding of your body. Why does a man who once touched you freely suddenly become more gentle, more attentive, even protective of your most vulnerable places? Because when a man is in love, your body is no longer a playground. It becomes sacred ground, and love reprograms his instincts. Lust wants to possess, but love wants to preserve. When a man only desires you physically, he will touch you out of hunger, not honor. But when his heart becomes involved, his fingers hesitate, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Women often overlook this shift because it doesn't look like passion. It looks like softness. Slower hands, gentler eyes, attention not of restraint, but of awe. In Jungian psychology, this is the anima, the feminine soul within the man, waking up. He no longer sees you as a body. He sees you as a mystery that he doesn't want to damage, even accidentally. He starts to notice your breath, your trembles, your stillness. He begins to listen with his skin. It's not performance anymore, it's presence. This is also where his subconscious becomes protective. He may instinctively shield you with his arm while you sleep. He might cover your body with a blanket without realizing it. He positions himself between you and the door, not because of danger, but because in his unconscious mind, you've become his, not as possession, but as something precious. This triggers the deepest masculine instinct, to guard. And that's not about dominance, it's about devotion. Many women miss this language because it's not loud. It's in the way he wraps his leg around yours in the dark, in how he pulls you closer when you shift away, in how his body instinctively shields you from the cold. These are not conscious choices. They are primal confessions. And when you start to recognize them, you stop asking for words. You start reading his soul by how he handles your softness. The tragedy? Some women confuse this tenderness with weakness. They mistake care for caution, and so they test him. They chase chaos over calm, and in doing so, they train him to return to detachment because they didn't recognize the rare gift he was offering: emotional integrity through physical reverence. Visualize this: your body wrapped in quiet protection, your soul heard even in your silence. You don't flinch when he's gentle. You don't doubt it. You receive it like a queen who knows she is worthy of devotion. He won't touch you like a conquest when he's afraid to lose your light. But even beyond physical protection lies a deeper pattern. one hidden in the way he exposes himself when the world is asleep. That's where the soul starts speaking, and that's what we uncover next. The confessional body language at 2 a.m. Why does a man open up most, physically and emotionally, when the world goes silent? Not at dinner, not in conversation, but after, in the dark, when you least expect it, because that's when his ego sleeps and his soul starts whispering. When a man loves you, his truth rarely arrives through grand gestures. It arrives in fragmented sentences, bare skin, sleepy hands, and a softness that cannot be performed. In Jungian terms, this is the shadow merging with the self. He becomes more whole because you make him feel safe enough to stop hiding from himself. This is where the most haunting moments of love occur, when he holds you longer than he needs to, when his arm doesn't fall away after, when his breath slows only when he hears yours. His body starts saying what his mouth never learned to speak. I am safe here. And for the first time in perhaps years, he lets go of performance. He stops curating his masculinity. He just is, raw, real, unmasked. This is where the archetype of the beloved awakens in the woman. She is no longer a temptress. She becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, he sees the boy who never got to cry, the man who never felt seen, the warrior who's tired of fighting alone. This is when he starts telling you things no one else knows, not in declarations, but in fragments. Maybe a story about childhood, a whisper about pain, a confession wrapped in laughter. He's not asking to be fixed. He's inviting you to witness him as he is. The danger? Some women reject this depth because it feels too heavy. They think, he's being too emotional, not realizing that he's offering the rarest form of intimacy, unshielded existence. When you dismiss that moment, he returns to his shell, and once he's locked himself away again, it may be years before he reemerges. But the woman who holds space for these late-night unravelings, she becomes unforgettable. She becomes the one he compares everyone else to, not because she was perfect, but because she saw him where he was most hidden and stayed. Picture this. It's 2:17 a.m. You're not speaking. You're listening to the rhythm of his breathing. You feel his hand trace your spine, not to arouse, but to remember. He's memorizing the feeling of being understood without explanation. He'll whisper his soul when he believes you won't run from the weight of it. What would you have done in that moment? Drop it below. But now we go deeper into the behavioral pattern that doesn't look like love at all. It looks like fear, but it's the kind of fear only men who cared too much experience. And that's where we go next. The panic before vulnerability. Why does a man suddenly pull away, become irritable, or even cold, right after he lets you in emotionally? Most women experience this as rejection, but in Jungian psychology, it is a rupture of the ego, a moment where the masculine self begins to dissolve its defenses. When a man starts to love you, something terrifying happens inside him. He realizes you have the power to ruin him, not with betrayal, but with presence, with a kind of emotional gravity that makes him feel like a boy again, unarmored, hopeful, exposed. This triggers what Jung might call a shadow flare, a panic response from the unconscious. The man is not running from you. He's running from the unfamiliar feeling of being fully seen. His body has revealed itself. His voice has cracked with truth. His guard has lowered. And suddenly, he realizes how much of himself you now hold. And for a man who has spent his life mastering control, that vulnerability is unbearable. It feels like drowning in soft waters. Sweet, but inescapable. Here's the paradox most women miss. The stronger his love, the more destabilizing it becomes. Not because he's weak, but because his masculinity has been conditioned to measure love through dominance, not surrender. So when he surrenders, When he lets go of the game, his system panics. He might ghost for a few days. He might become distant. He might even pick a fight, not because he wants to push you away, but because he's desperate to reclaim control over feelings he can't rationalize. The mistake women often make here is trying to fix it. They chase, they explain, they plead, but this only confirms his fear that love is a trap, that vulnerability leads to chaos. The empowered woman, however, does the opposite. She holds the line. She lets him retreat, but refuses to self-abandon in the process. And in doing so, she creates the space for him to return, not as a man trying to run, but as a man ready to stand still in front of the storm he feels for you. Visualize this: a lion pacing at the edge of a cliff, not because he's afraid of you, but because the ground beneath his heart is starting to break open. Let him tremble. Let him vanish. But don't you vanish from yourself. He will disappear for a moment when you've made him feel something permanent. But after this storm, if love survives, it awakens a new need in him, not to protect you, not to be understood, but to offer something sacred. And that's what we uncover next. The sudden urge to give without reason. Why does a man in love suddenly begin to offer gifts, small gestures, or acts of service without being asked? Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but out of a quiet, uncontrollable desire to leave a part of himself with you. Because love, for the masculine psyche, is not merely about receiving, it is about offering. And when a man loves you deeply, he no longer waits for you to ask. He begins to anticipate, to notice, to serve. This isn't about money or grand gestures. It's in the way he refills your water without a word, in how he brings you food without asking what you want, in how he remembers the way you like your blanket tucked, or what side of the bed makes you feel safest. These are not conveniences. They are sacred offerings. Because when a man loves a woman, he wants to embed himself into her daily life. He wants to be part of her ritual, not for dominance, but for closeness. Jungian theory tells us that the masculine is driven by purpose, and when that purpose becomes you, his mission subtly shifts. He no longer just lives for himself. He begins to think in terms of we, and this is when he becomes most generous, not just with objects, but with time, presence, and energy. He wants to be useful to you. He wants to be remembered in your quiet moments. He doesn't just want to be wanted. He wants to belong. The irony? Some women resist this stage. They downplay it. They say, "You don't have to," or "It's not a big deal," not realizing that in rejecting the gesture, they're rejecting his deepest emotional expression. He is not trying to impress you. He is trying to merge with you, to become part of your daily sacredness. And when you refuse to receive, you inadvertently tell him there's no space for his love in your world. The empowered woman doesn't ask for more. She simply receives what is already being offered. She sees the intention, not just the act. And in doing so, she affirms his gift not as a transaction, but as a tribute. Picture this: a man placing a cup of tea beside your pillow before you wake. Not because you needed it, but because loving you made him want to prepare your joy before you even opened your eyes. When he gives without being asked, it means he's already decided you're home. But what happens when this giving turns into silence, when his acts speak louder than his words, and he begins to reveal something darker, something sacred but unsettling? A love that no longer seeks validation, a presence that needs nothing but you. That's where we go next. The withdrawal from external validation. Why does a man who once sought attention, who was social, flirtatious, admired, suddenly begin to pull back from the external world when he deeply loves a woman? Because when the masculine finally finds a home in one woman's presence, his need to be seen by many begins to dissolve. The more he feels nourished by her acceptance, the less he hungers for applause. His performance ends. His desire to be impressive is replaced by the desire to be real, in one place, with one person. This is not isolation, it is anchoring. In Jungian terms, this is the sacred union between the animus and the anima, the masculine and feminine energies merging into integration. When a man is caught in the ego, he is driven by conquest, by visibility, by the illusion of significance. But when love becomes real, he no longer needs an audience. He begins to withdraw, not from the woman, but from the world that once validated him. The club loses its thrill. The flirty text loses its power. The chase dissolves. Not out of discipline, but because he no longer finds himself in those places. Some women misread this shift. They think he's pulling away, or he's becoming distant. But what's actually happening is sacred. He's turning inward. He's turning toward you. His love is no longer performative. It becomes devotional. You'll notice it in the way he listens longer, how his eyes stop wandering, how his phone stays untouched when you speak. These are not surface-level changes. They're soul recalibrations. This man, once scattered, now orbits one center. You. Not out of possession, but out of peace. Because real love ends the hunger for everything else. And in that quiet shift, he becomes a man, not chasing connection, but living inside it. Imagine him deleting numbers he once used for distraction, skipping parties he once went to for ego strokes, and instead staying home to fall asleep beside your breath. That is not weakness. That is inner peace. He stops needing the world when he starts belonging to your presence. But what happens when love becomes so deep it rewires his sense of safety? When your existence begins to mirror something he thought he'd never find? That's when he enters the final transformation, the rarest, most haunting form of masculine devotion. And that's what we uncover next. The softening of his survival instinct. Why does a man who has always been stoic, guarded, independent, suddenly start letting his guard down in subtle, almost childlike ways? Why does he start sharing fears, asking for reassurance, craving your presence like oxygen? Because when a man truly loves, he does something more dangerous than trust. He lets go of survival, his hyper-independence, his emotional detachment, his self-contained identity. All begin to melt, not because he's losing strength, but because he's finally safe enough to be human. This is the most sacred and misunderstood stage of love. When a man, conditioned by culture to always be the protector, finally surrenders into being protected, not in weakness, but in emotional nakedness. He may lie with his head on your chest, not for arousal, but to hear the rhythm of something softer than his own chaos. He may start asking questions like, "Are you okay?" Not to manage you, but to tether himself to your emotional ground. His body still looks strong, but now there is a tremble in his voice that says, "I hope I don't lose this." In Jungian psychology, this is the integration of the divine child within the man, the part of him that never got to rest, the part that always had to earn love, perform worth, control connection. When he loves you deeply, this child rises, and for the first time, he lets it. He becomes more emotional, more expressive, not always with words, but with needs, small gestures, lingering goodbyes, needing you to stay 5 minutes longer, not because he's needy, but because you've become home. The tragedy? Many women, having never seen this side of a man, interpret it as weakness. They pull back, they mock his emotion, they miss the miracle that's occurring, the hard shell of masculinity dissolving to reveal a soul that no longer needs armor. The empowered woman sees it. She holds it. She protects his softness, not with control, but with quiet presence. Picture him lying beside you, arm curled around your waist like a boy lost in a dream, not speaking, just breathing in your scent like it's the only thing that steadies his heart. And you, not trying to define it, just holding space for the warrior to sleep, for the protector to be protected. He will finally rest when your love no longer requires his performance. But the story doesn't end here, because when a man reaches this level of emotional nakedness, it triggers something even deeper inside you, something most women don't expect, but must prepare for. And that's a story for another time. This content is for informational purposes only, not professional advice. A man's love is rarely declared in grand gestures. It is whispered in strange silences, unveiled in sacred disruptions, confessed through the tremble of instinct. This journey has not revealed what love says, but what it does when the ego dies and the soul begins to speak. These are not just signs of desire, they are thresholds into the unguarded realm of masculine vulnerability. He pauses, not to hesitate, but to feel. Stillness becomes a ritual. In that breathless moment between touch and motion, his love no longer takes. It worships. He pulls back, not because he's detached, but because you've touched something unreachable. Disorientation follows intimacy like a shadow. His silence is not rejection. It is reverence. He softens around your body, not to please, but to protect. You are no longer flesh. You are something holy. The masculine guards what he fears losing. He opens at 2 a.m., not to impress, but to unravel. His breath, his voice, his half-spoken memories. They are not noise. They are entryways into his unguarded soul. He panics because he no longer owns himself. You have become his mirror. His mask cracks beneath the gravity of your stillness. He gives, not out of performance, but because love inside him must move. He wants to be remembered in your ritual, not your reward. He withdraws from the world, not to hide from you, but because everything outside you feels less real. You become the silence that ends his seeking. He lets down the armor, not as surrender, but as trust. His hardness was never strength. It was a cry for rest. You become the home he never had the words to ask for. So now, what remains? Not advice, not answers, but a question, the kind that shatters illusions with a whisper. Love is not measured in effort. It is revealed in transformation. The way he moves, the way he retreats, the way he offers himself in fragments. These are not puzzles to solve. They are poetry to witness. Do not reduce his devotion to language. Listen instead to the symphony his body plays when you are near, because the deepest power is not in making him stay, but in knowing that you were the place he stopped performing. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And when a man loves you beyond performance, beyond fear, beyond ego, you are not just desired, you are recognized. So tonight, as you return to yourself, ask, where are you still asking to be chosen, when your presence was always the prize? Subscribe to Jung Mind, where your shadow speaks, and your soul finally listens.